Congratulations on completing Module 1 of the BA 462 course this term. I have to say I was really interested in reading your discussion posts. I thought there was a really good, robust discussion of the topics, and I look forward to reading more. We also have a new addition in terms of assignment. You'll be starting your journaling. So just a brief note on that, and I'll post an announcement also on Canvas for the parameters too as well. But in your journal, I want you to look for any aspects of leadership around you, and that can be examples of effective leadership, failed leadership, missed opportunities for leadership. And I'm not talking about the big, obvious, save the day kinds of events, but just everyday things that happen. And these can be in venues such as work, family, while you're at the grocery store, shopping, watching a movie, anywhere. Just try to find leadership everywhere you look. And then in terms of the format, students have found that they typically do better if they jot down something every couple of days or every day. And so the format of the paper, typically once you have your heading or title page on it, then you would put a date and a paragraph or so of what you observed. Or you might just put event number 1, event number 2, event number 3. Or you could put April 13th, April 15th, April 18th, that sort of thing. So I'll let you kind of decide what works best for you. Please do double space those. Okay, and I think in total we probably are looking for 2 to 3 pages. So let's take a look forward, and I wanted to offer some additional information that's not exactly listed inside your 2 books because they aren't really textbooks in the traditional sense. But so we're going to discuss various aspects of leadership and how they might fit into what you're reading and studying. One of the areas I wanted to look at is charismatic leadership. As you can see on the screen, charisma comes from a Greek word, and translated, that word means divinely inspired gift. So it's really a perception on the part of followers that the leader is somebody with very exceptional qualities. And you can see that I've listed on the screen some of the things that we typically think of when we think of charismatic leaders. Highly confident, a little unconventional, very innovative, perceived to have superior expertise, and in addition has an extremely profound and unusual effect on followers. Charismatic leaders have an unusual ability to articulate a very appealing vision. They can help followers actually see the vision in front of them, and this helps with the connection between followers and leaders. They tend to build a very cohesive identification among the group, and will often empower followers to follow the vision and to rise to higher levels as well. Charismatic leadership is a characteristic that's often found in transformational leadership. So we're going to talk in this module, and we might spill into the next one, on some of the very recent contemporary styles of leadership. We talked briefly before about traits and characteristics, and then we added behaviors. So style in terms of what the leader does, not just who they are, but also what they do. And in the late 20th century, we found that many of our leading corporations had serious failures of leadership at the top. When we think of unethical or poor leadership, we often think of Enron or Tyco or WorldCom. There's quite a list of them. And because of those failed leaders and leadership in our larger organizations, people and citizens and employees and stakeholders have begun to ask for leaders that have a sense of responsibility to others, caring for others, as well as some sort of ethical or moral compass. The most followed and probably the most popular style of those contemporary ones is transformational leadership. On the screen in front of us, I have a scholarly definition, and it is one that those of us who do research on this form of leadership use as our underpinning for our research. It's a little bit, well, it sounds like a scholarly definition. So, but you'll see in red, and I'm sorry, in blue, I've highlighted 4 primary characteristics. They're still not really that clear. They're very theoretical sounding. So let's take a look how this might break down going forward. So in transformational leadership, the leader is very transforming in terms of not only the organization, but in followers. One of the roles of a transformational leader is to help followers to rise to higher levels, to try to reach self-actualization, and themselves become transforming leaders. Transforming leaders are about change. It's about changing the status quo. They're innovative, and when you think about it, if you have a vision of where you want to be, and we're here today and we want to be there tomorrow, something that has to change in between to get from where we are to where we want to be. So transformational leaders are highly visionary, and they are able to articulate, as in charismatic leaders, this ability to see the vision of the future and what it actually might look like. It's a very emotional tie that these leaders have with followers because of this sense of being able to help them see this vision. They often signify their words and articulate their vision using symbolism. And that's part of how this comes alive for followers. As I mentioned, part of their role is to help followers rise to higher levels. And so they often serve as coaches and mentors for their followers. So looking at our transformational leaders, we see them as change agents. We see them as innovative, and you can understand why this might be a really good style of leadership for the 21st century, given all of the transformation that's happened in our economy and the world with globalization. Leaders and companies are having to be highly adaptive, move with the times. So this is a very popular aspect of leadership. Another thing, by this relationship that these transformational leaders have with their followers, they're able to develop high levels of trust. Trust is an important variable when it comes to motivation of followers and can be very important in developing a positive culture within an organization. So because they're change agents, they do take risks, but they're not reckless in their risk-taking. So as I mentioned, the transforming leaders have an ethical underpinning. Not only do they care about others, but they have a sense of core values, and this guides their behavior. So that is something that differs from the previous century when we saw our leaders as being very authoritative and commanding and that sort of thing. So more of a top-down in the past. They're very transformational leaders, involve people, they care about their people. And another thing is that they are lifelong learners. Now, something I should probably mention is that the Kouzes and Posner book is really built on transformational leadership. So the things that I'm describing right now, you should be able to see as you read through the book and read through the stories. This should make sense. So you'll notice also on the list that transforming leaders have high cognitive skills. So it's not just about their emotional connection to people and their relational abilities, but they're also confident in what they can do, and they are accomplish things. So there is a confidence among followers that these leaders can actually lead them to this vision. So what's the difference between transformational and charismatic leaders? Well, often we see transformational leaders who have charisma, and this really is a good quality for them to have in that it helps boost this ability for them to make this connection with people. But the charismatic leaders are not necessarily transformational leaders, if that makes sense. Often we see charismatic leaders rise to the forefront in times of crisis. And when you think about it, that also makes sense because people are looking for an answer. They're scared. They're extremely worried. The world around them is falling apart, and they're looking for somebody who can lead them, who has a vision, and that has the confidence to take them where they need to go. And so this is why they often emerge in times of crisis. So they also are about change, obviously, given some of the things we've just said, but they also involve a lot of conflict. And it's a little bit, charismatic leaders don't necessarily have that transforming quality, but transformational leaders can be very charismatic. So I wanted to point out again that as we look at our Kouzes and Posner book, The Leadership Challenge, we are marching our way through kind of a description of how this looks in the practical world. We started by, under Model the Way, of looking at individuals. So the individual first has to know who they are and clarify their values in order to, you can't lead others before you know who you are, what you stand for, and where you want to go. And then once you are grounded in your own personal framework of values, then you need to walk the talk. And that's really what Set the Example is about. And when we think back to when we were children, one of the early things we heard about being a leader was lead by example. And that's pretty much what the chapter is talking about. We move on then to inspire to shared vision, and now this is where we are bringing in followers. This is a very important part of transformational leadership. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's about helping followers see a vision and believe in that vision, and in order to suffer through the negative aspects of change that we've all had to deal with in our organizations. And then through this inspirational aspect of transformational leadership, they're able to enlist others. This third main practice in the Leadership Challenge is what we call Challenge the Process. And this is the change agent aspect of transformational leadership. And you're just now beginning to, in this module, move forward to look at this. This is where our transformational leaders search for opportunities. They see opportunities where others see walls. They're not boxed in terms of their thinking. They're willing to experiment and take risks, but as I mentioned earlier, they do not take reckless risks. They're very calculated. Moving forward from there in future weeks, you'll have a chance to see how they are able then to use communication and build trust with followers in order to help empower them and help them rise up. This is the transforming of individuals towards self-actualization and becoming themselves leaders that you hear about in transforming leadership. And finally, it's about bringing it all together and continuing the process by celebrating what we've accomplished, but also starting this in one loop continuously so that we don't become stale. Another contemporary style of leadership is servant leadership. It's newer than transformational leadership, so we don't have as much data on it, but it is a very popular style of leadership right now. We do have some contemporary leaders in organizations that follow a servant leadership style. One of the early proponents of this style of leadership was Max De Pree. He was the CEO of Herman Miller. It's a furniture company, and he's written a great deal, and I believe he actually has an essay chapter in your Gallows book, if I'm not mistaken. Another contemporary that we think of as a servant leader is Howard Schultz, who's the CEO of Starbucks. And what they've done, not only by being servant leaders, is they've helped cement that culture of servant leadership within their organizations. So what is this thing we call servant leadership? It's really about going beyond your self-interest and wanting to serve the needs of others, helping them both professionally and personally. So here are some of the qualities: patience, kindness, humility, respectfulness, honesty, and commitment. You can see where some of this actually is very similar to transformational leadership. And we see here Robert Greenleaf started this movement, or made it really popular, beginning in the 1970s. And it is really now just beginning to take hold. For more information, just Google Robert Greenleaf or servant leadership, and there is a lot of information. And the Greenleaf organization has a big website where you can get a great deal of information. So to begin to summarize this, servant leaders are very altruistically motivated. If you remember altruism from your ethics class, is putting others before yourself, sometimes even at the expense of benefits to yourself. And in servant leadership, social responsibility is very important. It has a strong ethical underpinning. You can see when you add a need to eliminate social injustices and inequalities, how this makes sense as a contemporary leadership style. This is particularly attractive to our millennials and the younger generations, those who are concerned about global issues, about human issues, and see this as a possible answer to that. You'll notice the last bullet here talks about the leader focuses on followers above all other stakeholders. So that would include owners and so employees ahead of owners, ahead of suppliers, other stakeholders, customers, etc. So you might ask, so how does that help the organization get where they want to go? If the purpose of the organization is to provide a product or service and meet the needs of their owners, how is this doable using servant leadership? The concept behind it, the proponents of servant leadership would tell you that those who lead in this manner encourage and help their employees grow and develop in a positive way. The employees in themselves become servant leaders, but also are grateful and in turn give back to the organization. And this positive relationship, this trust that's built, elevates the quality and performance of those in the organization to high levels. So that is the viewpoint of the proponents. Those who are more skeptical of this leadership style are concerned that there is no organizational vision involved. So you can see that there are some slight differences and some similarities with transformational leadership. Here are the characteristics established through our research of servant leaders. I'll let you take a minute and take a look at those. You can see that as you read through them that they are more relationship oriented than they are task oriented. And the bottom line, if the test to determine if somebody is a servant leader is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? If the answer is yes, then you would be perceived as a servant leader. The last contemporary style I'd like to discuss is authentic leadership. One of the Gallows essays that you'll be reading in this module, I believe it's chapter 8, is on authenticity. And because of the lack of transparency among many of our leading organizations, particularly in the corporate world, there's been a real desire to add authenticity to the whole mix of leadership skills. So here is the scholarly definition once again. I'll let you take a look at it. In blue, I have highlighted the primary elements. And so that's really clear as mud, right? Well, let's take a look at what this really means. So there are 4 primary things that we attribute to authentic leaders. One is self-awareness. This is similar to what you're reading about in the first chapters of the Kouzes and Posner book, establishing your values, who are you, developing your moral framework and knowledge about yourself and the value system that you're going to follow. And this leads right into the internal moral perspective, which means that when authentic leaders make decisions, they use those core values to guide their decisions. And so, again, this is another contemporary leadership style where ethics has a strong foundation in it. The third component is relational transparency, and this means that basically authentic leaders are open and transparent, and the person that is truly themselves is what their followers and those around them see. So there isn't a different person at work than there is at home, that there is on television show or at a board meeting. They are always themselves and authentic. Now, one of the proponents have been very strong about this. However, a lot of scholars have found this leadership style to be lacking, and that was because their primary concern was the leader establishes the values that are followed by the organization, but that's a lot of power to be able, and what if those are not the values of the majority of people that they serve or who follow them? So that led to the final fourth component, which is what we are calling balance processing, which means that authentic leaders are open to a variety of opinions, and they do listen before they make their final decisions. So they go to their core values first, but they also do listen to other perspectives and take that into consideration as they make their decisions. Authentic leaders it's a very optimistic style, and values are extremely important. Unlike transformational leadership, they don't strive to transform their followers into growing or developing or becoming leaders themselves. So I mentioned the pros and cons. Another knock against this style of leadership is that we find authenticity and transparency woven into the previous two that I talked about, transformational and servant leadership. And so many scholars are really wondering if we actually even need a self-sustaining leadership style unto itself called authentic leadership. And I happen to be in that camp if you're at all interested. It's just my opinion. So I've offered 3 different contemporary styles, and you'll notice again that all 3 of them have a strong ethical foundation. And as I mentioned, this really was a backlash coming out of the end of the 20th century when we had so many failed leaderships. And we spent the first couple of decades defining what each of these styles really is through the research. And now the research today is beginning to look at, does this make a difference? Does having a more ethical, moral, other-centered leadership style have a correlation with employee performance or organizational performance? So we are in the initial stages of gathering this information, and so far our research is showing us that there is a positive correlation. So this is good news, and hopefully this is something that will catch on, and if it can be established that leaders who are positive in this manner can also have organizations that might even outperform those who do not, then that would be pretty exciting for the years to come. So I hope you are feeling like you're starting to get a little bit of grounding in the course, and that you are starting to get your head wrapped around this idea of leadership. Again, as a reminder, what I would like to have happen is for each of you to begin to look at leadership as it applies to you personally. And by the end of the term, I would like for each of you to come up with your own personal definition of what leadership is to you. As mentioned in the very beginning, even all of the scholars who study this and have studied it for years, I cannot agree on one common definition. So I believe that leadership is unique to each and every one of us, and that we have our own natural styles. I also believe that there are some common threads that run through it. So I'll let you wrestle with that and see what you come up with. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you online. Thank you.